That October afternoon, when the final bell rang and classes came to an end, Oliver packed his books without the slightest enthusiasm. It was the first year he had convinced himself he was too old for trick-or-treating. Halloween, once a holiday he had adored, now felt like a childish charade, a noisy evening of costumed kids and rowdy teenagers pelting houses with eggs. Something about it no longer felt magical. It felt hollow. He wandered down the street, lost in his thoughts, when he nearly bumped into Jimmy. Jimmy was the kind of boy who carried an aura with him. Confident, sharp, almost untouchable. To Oliver, he seemed like the coolest guy in the entire town. Jimmy hadn't even been in school that long, but from his very first day, he'd made his presence known. He wasn't exactly popular, more of a bully, really, but his swagger had sent a clear enough message: don't cross him. Oliver, being a year younger, never had the chance to properly speak with Jimmy. Still, whenever Jimmy played soccer, Oliver found himself lingering nearby, watching. He hated soccer, but somehow when Jimmy played it, it seemed less awful. Sometimes he'd call out a greeting as the game began or ended, and to his quiet thrill, Jimmy always responded with a nod or a grin. That had been the extent of their interaction. Tiny moments at the edges of noisy fields. Now standing in front of him, Jimmy actually smiled. He recognized Oliver. He even remembered him from those games. Oliver froze, eyes downcast, his throat dry. He knew he should say something clever, something smooth, but all he managed was a half nod and a nervous laugh. His cheeks burned with embarrassment. Jimmy's friends stood around him, laughing, talking, throwing in jokes as Oliver shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Jose Luis, asked whether Oliver was still planning to go trick-or-treating like the little kids. It sounded less like a question, more like a jab. Before Oliver could stammer out a response, Jimmy cut in with a grin, claiming confidently that Oliver obviously didn't do that anymore. Oliver quickly lied, insisting he hadn't gone trick-or-treating in years. The others seemed satisfied, and Oliver, despite his nerves, felt a rush of relief. Somehow that lie had earned him just a little more respect. Then, almost without realizing how it happened, Oliver found himself agreeing to attend a Halloween party at Donovan's house. It was the party. Everyone had heard about it. Kids from all over town dressed up, drank, and caused chaos, all while Donovan's father worked the night shift. Oliver had never been invited before. He wasn't even sure why he'd agreed, considering his parents would never in a million years let him go. But when Jimmy suggested it, his lips seemed to move on their own. He had said yes, and now there was no turning back. That evening, Oliver executed his shaky plan. He stuffed pillows and dirty laundry under his blankets to create the illusion of a sleeping body, then climbed out the window, inching down the massive oak tree that stretched outside his room. He hadn't figured out how he'd climb back up later, but that was a problem for the future. Heart pounding, he slipped into the night. Donovan's house was alive with sound and light when he arrived. The yard and halls were crawling with masks. Devils, witches, skeletons, ghouls. He froze. He had no costume. He told himself he'd pretend he had forgotten it on purpose, but standing there, plain and ordinary among monsters, he felt naked. Just as he considered turning back, a familiar voice teased him. Jimmy's voice. Jimmy's face was painted a ghostly white, his arms and cheeks smeared with bruises that looked disturbingly real. Fake blood staining his mouth. A plastic headband with a fake knife sticking through it sat on his head. Oliver laughed nervously, praising the costume, and claimed he was dressed as a homicidal psychopath, since they looked like ordinary people. Jimmy smirked, pulled off his headband and plopped it on Oliver's head. "Then you're a psychopath who got what he deserved," he joked. Oliver laughed harder than he should have, though his stomach twisted. As the night wore on, the chaos dulled. Many guests, drunk and stumbling, drifted home. Oliver considered leaving too, but Jimmy, surprisingly sober, stuck around and started a real conversation with him. For Oliver, it was better than the party itself. Sitting near the fire Donovan's friends had made in an old barrel, Jimmy gave him his home phone number. They joked, they talked, they laughed, and Oliver felt like this was the first real night of his life. But then Donovan's father came home unexpectedly, slamming open the door. The party dissolved into panicked scrambling. Everyone fled into the cold October night. Oliver, too frightened to go home alone, tagged along with Jimmy's group. They wandered the quiet streets, restless. Then Augustine, grinning wickedly, said, "This is the time the butcher comes out." Oliver stiffened. The butcher. The old legend. Everyone laughed except Jimmy, who looked confused. He hadn't grown up in town. He didn't know. When pressed, Oliver told him the story, haltingly, nervously. How the Zarp Farm belonged to a cruel butcher who tortured pigs and maybe people. How one Halloween, townsfolk found him dismembering a missing man. How they lynched him, hanged him, and skinned him alive. And how with his dying breath he cursed them, offering his soul to the devil, promising to return every Halloween night. The group laughed at the tale, but Oliver's heart raced. For years that story had haunted him. It was his deepest fear. Yet now he pretended to laugh too, just to blend in. To prove themselves brave, Emmanuel challenged everyone to visit the Zarp Farm. To Oliver's horror, Jimmy agreed instantly. All eyes turned to him. Under their stares, Oliver's resistance crumbled. Against every instinct screaming in his chest, he nodded. The Zarp Farm wasn't what Oliver had imagined. It wasn't draped in blood or crosses or pentagrams. It was just an old, collapsing farmhouse, gray and lifeless. But inside, the smell of rot lingered. Symbols scrawled on barn walls whispered of something darker. A sense of wrongness hung in the air, though Jimmy dismissed it as graffiti. They built a fire and told stories, but one by one, people drifted away into the shadows. Soon, only Oliver, Jimmy, and Augustine remained. Then Augustine left too. Minutes ticked by. No one returned. Oliver felt uneasy, but Jimmy's gaze held him in place. There was something in the way he looked at him, something Oliver had never dared dream about. When Jimmy leaned in, their lips brushed, and Oliver's chest burst with a terrifying, beautiful heat. He didn't want it to end. But then, at precisely 3 a.m., a scream tore through the night. A girl's scream, shrill, broken, final. Jimmy stood instantly, urging Oliver to follow. Oliver wanted to run in the opposite direction, but fear of the darkness and fear of being left alone dragged him after Jimmy. They crept through long, rotting hallways, and then came more screams, 2 of them, echoing, blood-chilling. Even Jimmy faltered. Behind a door, they found the missing knives and hooks, the ones from the legend. and hanging on them were their friends, lifeless. Augustine with a knife splitting his skull. Laura strung up by a hook, her face twisted in terror. The horror was unbearable. They ran. The farmhouse warped around them, a labyrinth with no exit. Each hallway circled back into itself, every corner echoing with laughter. Low, guttural, inhuman laughter. At one point, they thought to hide, wedging themselves into a tiny storeroom. Their breath came fast, shallow, too loud. The laughter came closer, and then silence. Minutes crawled by. Relief began to set in. Maybe it was gone. Maybe the nightmare was over. They even whispered promises to burn the farm to ashes once they escaped. But then came the stench, the hot, foul breath against their necks. Slowly, trembling, they turned. There he was, the butcher. His face was grotesque, shredded and sagging, skin stitched with old wounds, his teeth black and jagged. His butcher's apron was smeared with fresh blood, and in his hand gleamed a massive knife. His smile was not human. It was a gaping wound, stretched too wide, dripping madness. Oliver froze, paralyzed by the sight. The legend was real. Jimmy grabbed him, yanking open the door, dragging him into the dark. But the laughter followed, deeper now, booming through the walls, as the butcher began his hunt. And that night, Oliver finally understood the truth of the rhyme whispered to children. You will stay in the dark so as not to see him arrive. When he is close, there is no way out. The butcher will catch you and skin you with his knife.